Hey, have you heard people say that they don't want soap if it's made with lye? Or maybe you've even said that because you've heard that lye is really harsh and that you want to have lye-free soap. And maybe you've seen people advertising a course to make soap that doesn't have lye in it. Well, the reality is soap, by definition, has lye, or it starts with lye. So the first thing that we're going to do is going to talk about what soap is. And soap is quite simply oils plus lye, and that turns into soap. It gets saponified, and so it is no longer oils and lye, but it is now a completely different thing that we call soap. So in today's live stream, I'm going to talk about what lye is, why you have to have it in your soap, and why if the soap is made correctly, it's completely safe and it doesn't have any lye in it after it is saponified. So I know when I was originally wanting to make soap, I was nervous about it because I knew that it contained lye. And I was nervous about working with lye. And luckily, I happened to meet someone who knew how to make soap, and she said that she would be happy to teach me. I was also initially very resistant to the idea of using a digital scale because everything I saw about making soap said you had to have a digital scale. And I was very much anti-digital scale because I thought people have been making soap since the beginning of time and they didn't have digital scales. So why do I need to buy a digital scale? And after I learned about lye and saponification, I discovered that if you want to have soap that is consistently good from one batch to the next, in fact, if you just want to have soap that consistently turns into soap from one batch to the next, then you need to have a digital scale because every oil has a different saponification value, which means it needs a different amount of lye in order to cause it to saponify. So if you have too much lye, then the finished product will have excess lye in it. If you don't have enough lye, it's just not going to turn into soap. You'll have a big bucket of gross mush that you've just basically wasted all of your money. So now maybe you're like, oh, but what about, melt and pour? Well, melt and pour was made with lye because it is soap. And like I said, you cannot make soap without lye. So when you look on a label and it says sodium palmate, for example, that is palm oil plus sodium hydroxide. So when palm oil and sodium hydroxide are saponified, it becomes sodium palmate. It's no longer palm oil and sodium hydroxide. It's become something completely different. Like when you mix hydrogen and oxygen, it can become water. Like you took two gases and now you've turned it into a liquid. And so it's a chemical reaction. And that's what happens when you make soap, is that you have a chemical reaction. If you see sodium olivate, that means that it was made with sodium hydroxide and olive oil. So if you see a label and lye is not on the label, it doesn't mean that there was no lye used to make it. It just means that it was saponified and there is no more lye in it. In fact, extra bonus fun fact for the day, palm olive was originally made with palm and olive oil back in the late 1800s, and that's where the name palm olive comes from. And in fact, here's an ad from, I believe, 1899 that tells you that very fact that, it's made of palm and olive oil. Palm olive was originally a bar of soap, as basically all soaps were originally bars. And so at this point, somebody will often ask, well, what about liquid soap? Liquid soap, instead of being made with sodium hydroxide, liquid soap is made with potassium hydroxide. So don't make the mistake of thinking that you can just make bar soap and then shred it and add water to it and have liquid soap. Somebody actually convinced me to do that like 23 years ago. And within a couple of weeks, it is super nasty and stinky because whenever you add water to something like that, it starts to grow bacteria. And so that is not where liquid soap comes from. Liquid soap is made with a completely different process than bar soap. And sadly, Palmolive no longer makes soap. Most of what you see in the store now today is not a soap, it is a detergent. So you don't see something on the label like sodium palmate, you see something on the label like sodium lauryl sulfate or sodium laureth sulfate, and all of these things that a lot of us want to avoid because they have been linked to cancer and endocrine disrupting disorders and things like that. So one of the reasons I started making my own soap was because of problems I had with being allergic to all of the soaps that I could buy in the store. So it looks like there's a couple questions. Somebody says, is it safe to use soap for goat and sheep to mix it with drinking water? It's safe, but I don't know why you would want to do it because it's soap. So like you could eat soap. It's not going to hurt you, but it's not good for you either. There's no benefit to doing it. If you have heard about putting soap in water as a deworming method, that does not work. It was one of the many things that I tried 20 years ago when we had a problem with dewormer resistance. The thing that's famous, the thing that most people hear about is using Shaklee Basic H, because that's something that Joel Salatin had in one of his books back in the 90s. And the thing is, he rotates his cattle. He moves his cattle every single day. So the reason that he didn't have worm problems had nothing to do with putting soap in their water and had everything to do with rotating them every day. So to get control of parasites, which I've got a lot of videos and podcast episodes about that, where I interview vet professors and parasite researchers, pasture rotation is a fantastic way to control parasites. So back to the whole thing about making soap. So I think having melt and pour soaps say that they, make soap without lye is where people get confused, because the reality is you're really not making soap with melt and pour. What you're doing is you are melting down a soap that someone else made with lye, saponified all the lye with the oils, and now all you're doing is you're going to melt it down, maybe you're going to add in color or some kind of essential oils or fragrance, and then pour it into cute little molds to make roses or goats or cats or whatever you want to, make it look like. And so melt and pour soap is more of a crafter kind of a thing than a self-reliance kind of a thing, because making your own soap is something that you can do with your goat milk and oils that you can buy at the store, and then lye, which lye today it's very hard to find lye today. When I started making soap 20 years ago, you could find it in any hardware store. However, lye is used to make meth, which is an illegal drug. So it has gotten a lot harder to purchase lye than it used to be. You either, I purchase 40 pounds of lye at a time directly from the manufacturer, Boyer Corporation, which makes Red Crown lye, and I buy it in 40-pound boxes. And so we're lucky we live south of Chicago, so we drive into the city to purchase the lye directly from them. But so people usually, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes for people to find lye for making it, for making soap, but you can still find it. It's just not as easy to find as it used to be when I got started 20 years ago. So kind of back to what I was saying before about the stuff you see in the store is like all of your popular soaps that are really cheap now are actually detergent bars. And that's why they're so hard on your skin, because if you think you're like detergent, but that's what I use to wash my clothes. Exactly. Detergent is a whole different set of chemicals, and it works really, really well for cutting grease and, ketchup stains and things like that people have in their laundry. And so trying to use homemade soap, and believe me, I tried it all because our goal was originally complete self-sufficiency. Trying to use homemade soap for laundry or washing your dishes or whatever really does not work that great. I have an article on my website about making your own homemade laundry cleaner, which does not use soap. It has other ingredients in it because adding soap is not helpful and actually can cause problems with your washing machine. So back to tonight's topic, which is about lye and soap. So it is really super important that you use a lye calculator when you make soap. And I know I always tell my students that they should never just use a recipe off of the internet to make soap, because if you've got the wrong amount of lye in there for the oils that you're using, then it's not going to turn out. It's either going to be too harsh. If you've got too much lye, it'll be very harsh. If you don't have enough lye, you just wind up with a big pot of goo. And I used to see that happen a lot in my University of Massachusetts goat students, because I've been teaching a course for University of Massachusetts online about raising goats since 2013. And it's a production class. So it's having a business with goats. And so in addition to learning all about raising goats, they also have to make cheese, cook with goat meat, make goat milk soap, and all these kinds of things. And the first few years, people could use whatever recipe they wanted. And after a few years and seeing so many students waste their money on recipes that did not work, even though I told them about using a lye calculator, they wouldn't. They would just assume like, oh, I found this recipe online. It must be good. So they would use it. And then they would wind up with a pot of goo, and they have now wasted their money because it's not going to turn into soap. It's just going to get thrown away. So you want to make sure you use a lye calculator. The one in this website, the Sage, is the one that I personally have been using since I started 23 years ago. And I know it works. There are other ones online. Can't vouch for those because I haven't used them. But I know this one works, which is why this is the one I always suggest that people use, because I've never gotten any negative feedback about this. So if you find a recipe online, you need to run it through a lye calculator. And you cannot just swap out, like, with cooking, a lot of times you could swap out your oils. Like, oh, well, this recipe says to use olive oil, but I'm going to use avocado oil. If you do that in soap making, you have to run it through a lye calculator, because the saponification value of olive oil is different than avocado oil. So you may need to use more or less lye if you switch the oil. So it's very important that you use the correct amount of lye if you want your soap to come out. And this is where the digital scale comes in, because you really do need to weigh your oils, and you also need to weigh your lye. If you don't, maybe it'll come out, maybe it won't. There was a woman when I used to speak at all the Mother Earth News fairs, and a woman came up to me after a talk one day and said that she has this recipe that she just loves. It makes the best soap in the world. When it turns out, sometimes it just doesn't turn out. And she wanted to know why. And I said, oh, it sounds like your scale is bad, or maybe, like your batteries are dying. If it's a battery operated, maybe the batteries are dying, or maybe the scale is just too old and it's going bad. And she goes, oh, I don't use a scale. And I was like, oh, well, that's your problem right there. You need to start using a scale. And she's like, oh, but I never use a scale, and sometimes it turns out. And I said, right. So do you want to just keep counting on luck that you're just going to get lucky and eyeball it correctly? Or do you want to have a good batch of soap every single time? Because if you want to have a good batch of soap every single time, then you need to have a digital scale so that you use exactly the same amount of oils of each oil and exactly the same amount of lye. Because when you look at the lye calculator and just play with it, if you don't even want to make soap yet, just play with the lye calculator, and see how the amount of lye that you need is going to change based upon the different oils that you use. So it looks like a couple more questions. What is the best oil to use in soap? It depends. So if you have been around me for very long, you know that when it comes to goats, my answer usually is it depends. And this is the same thing about what oil to use. So it depends because each oil has a different quality. So for example, coconut oil and palm oil are going to make a bar that's really hard and it's going to lather a lot. If you want a lot of lather, then coconut and palm oil are great for that. However, they're also very harsh. So you see a lot of people who want to they're cheap. And so coconut and palm get used a lot. And unfortunately, they're very drying to skin. And so if you buy homemade soap that is just made with coconut and palm, it's going to be a very hard bar. It's going to last a long time, but it could also be really hard on your skin. However, on the other end of the spectrum, olive oil is really, really good for your skin. But if you make a soap with 100% olive oil, it is not going to suds at all. And it is going to be a pretty soft bar. And it's not going to last as long. So this is why most people today combine oils. Historically, people used whatever they had on the farm. So if you had pigs, you were going to use pig fat, which is lard. If you had cattle, you'd use tallow. And those particular fats have their own issues. I tried to make soap with 100% lard one time just as an experiment to see what would happen. And it was also really soft. It didn't suds at all. It didn't clean at all. And I made the mistake of using lard that had boar taint. Don't do that unless you want to smell like a boar after you wash your hands, because the boar taint winds up in the fat and your soap will be stinky. So not a great idea. As you asked your question, I realized that we have a handout. I'm not sure, or it looks like you're on YouTube. I will see if we can get you. Oh, I think Amy is on. Amy, if you're on, could you please provide a link to my handout on soap making ingredients? Because it goes into detail on this and tells you what oils are best for what purpose. Let's see. Back to, where was I? It's a good thing. I used to never even use an outline for my talks, but it's good that I do, because now I know where I can go back and pick up so I don't leave out anything. So basically what happens, saponification is when lye, in this case sodium hydroxide, is mixed with oils. So I like to say they magically turn into soap, which is a completely different thing. Just like, when hydrogen and oxygen are mixed, they turn into water. So when your recipe is correctly balanced and you have enough oil in there for the lye to get completely spent, then you'll have a nice bar of soap. What I shoot for in all of my recipes is an excess of 5% fat. And you will see that you may see people talk about super fatting, and there are some people that just try to make this super fatting thing way more complicated than it is. They tell you about French milling and double batching and all this kind of stuff, or rebatching. You don't need to do that to super fat. Just when you use the lye calculator, use the amount that says you will have 5% excess fat. That's it. Your soap is now super fatted. And so when you do that, it's kind of like, so not all of the oil is saponified in that case. So in that case, if you've got a 5% super fat, 5% excess oil, then I always say it's kind of like washing your hands and using lotion at the same time. This is why I went from one of those people who had horrendously dry skin. I had a bottle of soap and a bottle of lotion at every sink, because when I wash my hands, I need to use lotion because the soap dried out my skin so much, which I did not know at the time. It wasn't soap, it was actually detergent, and that's why it was drying my skin out. But when I switched to using my own homemade soap, I no longer needed the lotion. In fact, as I'm saying this reminds me, I have some lotion that I need to throw away right now because I get the stuff without preservatives, and it's a couple years old. And the last time I sniffed it, it was funky, because the only time I use lotion now is like in the absolute dead of winter when it's below 0 outside and our humidity is so low that everybody's skin is dry and cracking. So that is the beauty of having homemade soap and being able to control the amount of excess fat in there. A lot of people would ask me, they're like, oh, you have goats. Do you make goat milk lotion? And I say, no, I don't need to, because I make my own goat milk soap. And it is super fatted, which means that there is extra oil in there that keeps your skin from drying out. And no, it does not make your skin feel oily. Nobody would ever like use the soap and go, oh, this feels oily. It just doesn't dry out your skin. So, yes, lye can be dangerous. And if you take my soap making course, I have a whole video. I have a video in there on lye safety and the importance of eye protection, because if you get lye in your eye, or even if you get the soap batter in your eye, it will destroy your eyeball. I was making soap one time many years ago. It was before a soap making class. I've taught soap making in a lot of different places. I was getting ready to do a soap making class at a college where they wanted me to give everybody a fresh batch of soap that they could take home to slice tomorrow. And so I was in a rush and I was distracted. And it was back when I still wore reading glasses, because I didn't need glasses all day at that point. And as I was pouring the soap batter into the mold, I just flipped my reading glasses up over my head like that, which was a really big mistake because it splattered and got in my eye. And thankfully, I knew that I needed to rinse my eye. You're supposed to rinse it for 15 minutes, which I found to be pretty much impossible. And but when I tried to look across the room and I covered the eye that didn't get any, I realized that everything was very blurry. So I went to the emergency room, and it's a long story, but I can still see, which is good, because lye is incredibly caustic. So now I wear glasses all day long. So there's no danger in me doing something silly like that again, mindlessly. My husband makes soap, because we sell soap in a grocery store now and online. And my husband makes most of it. And he actually wears chemistry goggles when he does it. And a lot of people do wear chemistry goggles when they do it. The other thing that is really, really important to know is that when you mix the lye with water or goat milk or whatever your liquid is, that you always add the lye to the liquid. If you do it the other way around, you will get an explosion. And I am one of those people who kind of likes to try everything myself. However, I didn't need to test that out, because my husband told me that when he was in high school chemistry class that he did it the wrong way and exploded a beaker and has a scar on his arm as a memory of that historic event. So definitely, learn from his mistake, and always make sure that you add your lye to whatever your liquid is. And if you use goat milk soap, which what I teach people to do now is almost exclusively making with goat milk soap. When you use goat milk, you need to freeze it so that you don't burn the sugars in there, because if you do, it can cause problems because it'll overheat. So it has to be frozen. So I hope that it doesn't scare anybody. Like, you have to understand that lye can be very dangerous if you do get it in your eyes or mucous membrane or on your skin. So if you were to get a splatter on your hand or something as you're pouring it, you just need to wipe it off and then run that hand under running water for as long, just until it doesn't burn anymore. So, I mean, I've definitely done that, and it's very easy to get it off of your skin. Getting it out of your eye is much harder. So, let me see what our questions, the new questions are. Oh, okay, good. So if you want to see our, Amy just posted in the Facebook groups the link for you to be able to get the soap ingredient list. So it's a list of a lot of different oils, and it tells you what their specific properties are and what you want to look for in a recipe to see, what you want to use. And then, so someone just asked, you can substitute the liquid for goat's milk in any soap recipe. Yes. I have had students, I had one student whose son owned a brewery. Making soap with beer is apparently a really big thing for breweries. They sell beer soap. And so she took the information that she learned in my class, and then she started making soap with beer as the liquid and selling that at her son's brewery. Some people use tea. The only thing is, if you use something like tea, don't expect, like if you use chamomile tea, don't expect your soap to smell like chamomile, because it's just not strong enough, unfortunately. So to get any scent, you either need to use fragrance oils or essential oils. Not teas and things like that don't really do anything for it. So I just want to address a couple other common misconceptions. So sometimes if people think like, oh, if there's lye in it, it's not natural. Well, there's not lye in it now. Now it is soap, and soap is completely natural. People have been making soap for thousands of years. Historically, before you could go to the store and buy lye, people made lye with ashes. So that is another question I get sometimes. People ask if I can teach them to make soap with ashes so they can make their own lye. And the answer is no, because that is a very, making soap historically was a very inexact science, but it was made using waste products from the farm. So basically you took the ashes from your fireplace or your wood stove, you took the fat from your pig or your cow or whatever, and you made lye with the ashes and used some kind of liquid, and then that was how you made your soap. And a lot of times it didn't turn out. There was, I love historical research, and there was John Adams' daughter once wrote him a letter complaining that, she tried to make 3 batches of soap yesterday and 2 of them didn't turn out. But she finally got one that turned out. And so that is why having a digital scale is really a good idea, because they didn't have digital scales back then. And so they did have a lot of failures, but they just kept doing it because they didn't have another choice. Today, we do have a choice. We can use a digital scale. And it's funny because I was so resistant to buy a digital scale. And then I realized that I could use it for a gazillion things around the homestead. So as soon as we bought it, we immediately started weighing our milk when we brought it in from the barn, so we could keep track of our goat's milk production. It is much, much more accurate to weigh your fruits and vegetables for canning, because really, what's 2 quarts of apples? Depending on how they're sliced and all this kind of stuff, they're going to get different weights. So it's much better to use canning recipes that have weights rather than volume kind of measurements. Sometimes people ask, what is the difference between sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide? And it's really just in the type of soap. If you want to make bar soap, you need sodium hydroxide. If you want to make liquid soap, you would use potassium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide can be used You can make bar soap either with hot process or cold process. I make cold process soap because I don't have hours to stand around stirring soap. And that's what hot process is hot process means that most people get a crock pot to make hot process. And I just don't have that kind of time. I am a busy person, and I can make a batch of cold process soap in about 20 minutes. And so we can knock out 7 batches of soap in about 3 hours and clean up and be done. And the reason I say 7 batches is because that's how many molds we have. And so that's what we usually do. It's like, if we're going to get the kitchen dirty, let's go ahead and fill up every mold so that that cleanup time is worth it. Because it takes as long to clean up as it does to make a batch of soap. Sometimes people ask, should I start with melt and pour before moving on to real soap? And the answer is no. Melt and pour doesn't teach you anything about making real soap. Like I said, it's a completely different process. In fact, if you ever want to get into like French milling and rebatching and stuff like that, that is basically you're doing the same thing as melt and pour. Sometimes when people don't have good instructions for making soap, they don't understand how the fragrances and essential oils can affect the soap batter. They wind up with a batch that seizes, which means that it turns into mashed potatoes before you can pour it, which just makes it more challenging to have a nice batch of soap, like, because it's all lumpy and bumpy and stuff, but it still turns into soap. But if that happens, you can rebatch it and melt it down. If you still, if you want it to look pretty, you melt it down, you shred it, melt it down, and do it over again. So that's always a possibility too. So the big takeaways here are that all soap starts with lye. If it doesn't have lye in it, then it's a detergent, which is made with all kinds of chemicals. And there is no lye in your soap after it is saponified. And so sometimes actually people will ask, like, so how long does it take to saponify? Saponification is usually complete after 24 hours. But the reason that people talk about curing soap is because it needs to dry. So if you used your soap right away, it wouldn't last very long. You need to give it time to dry. When I made my very first batch of soap, I was so excited about trying it that I did. After a week, I started using a bar, and holy cow, it melted so fast. I was just using it like at the sink, and it was melting really super fast. So by the time I got to the second bar, it was a week later, and there was a huge difference. Like, it was a lot harder. It took a lot longer to melt away. And then I noticed like a week later, it was even harder. So that very first batch of soap that I made, I experimented, and I got to see like, well, what happens if you use it sooner? And there's nothing, like, it's not harsh on your skin or anything. It's just going to melt really fast. So that's why if you ever get into selling soap, you always want to make sure you let it dry for 3 or 4 weeks, because if your soap gets used up too fast, people aren't going to buy it again. So if you want return customers, you want to have soap that lasts for a while. So if you're interested in learning, we can give you that link in the chat so that you can sign up for it. And I can also show you right here. This is the sign up page. And if anybody has any other questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments and I will answer them right now. And I will be doing more live streams. I'll be doing another one tomorrow night, Thursday night, and Friday night on other aspects of soap making, so that you can learn more about it. If you're still a little nervous, like, I don't know, should I do this? If you're wondering what these spots are, that's coffee in there. And no, the soap does not smell like coffee. That was my big plan was, and this is how I learned that adding botanicals to soap really doesn't make it smell like anything, because I had this big goal to make a coffee scented soap. And when it didn't smell like anything, I thought, okay, well, that was a bust. I'm never making it again. But I had one customer who absolutely loved it, wound up buying every bar and asking for more. So I wound up making a couple batches. Initially, I was making a couple batches every year just so that we would always have it available for her. But then other people started to like it too. And so now it's one of our more popular ones. And then when I talked about putting soap into molds that look like a cat or a horse or a sheep, that's what that is. And then if you page down, here's some pictures from the course. You can access it on a laptop, a desktop, tablet, phone. And then we do that in October because soap makes a great gift. So I know when I first started making soap, I gave it to lots of people for gifts, and they really loved it. And that actually turned out to be a great way to start selling it, because people were like, hey, I want some more of that soap. So if you're watching this later and you've got questions, feel free to post in the comment section below and we'll get back to you. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll be back again tomorrow night, same time, 7 p.m. Central Time, to talk about part 2 of soap making. Bye for now.